In the morning, things were different. The mood around camp had shifted entirely as the volunteers seemed to be packing up their tents into their Broncos. Steph watched from afar in her camp chair with her rifle on her lap as she clasped a tin of black coffee. "What's going on?" I asked her. She grunted and gestured to the blue percolator sitting nearby with a swing of her head. "Coffee first." I let out an almost amused huff as I poured myself a cup. I looked around for any sugar or creamer, but I realized quickly it was a lofty fantasy. I sat down close by, wrinkling my nose at the sensation of slightly burnt Maxwell House coating my throat. "Why is everyone leaving?" I finally asked. "They found another body," she said without looking at me. I raised an eyebrow. "Shouldn't we bring more people here then?" "He had a 22 in his leg," she said casually as she took a long sip from her chipped mug. "Someone shot him?" "Mm-hmm. State Bird found him on a ridgeline without a shirt. Guess he was smart enough to use his shirt to stop the bleeding, but lost too much blood, so hypothermia did the rest." "How could have that happened? Jess didn't mention hearing a gunshot." "No? Scared girl like her ain't reliable. Memory's a fickle thing when shit hits the fan," she remarked while rolling her neck before continuing. "Some of the deputies think one of them was packing a pea shooter to score some pussy and wound up shooting each other in the panic when that thing came for him. Or maybe it's some jackass spotlighting off season." "Spotlighting?" I asked, tilting my head ever so slightly. "Yeah, shining a beam on a deer at night so it freezes up, makes it easy to drop him. Legal as hell." "So, what does that mean for us?" "It means you're probably getting benched. They already send the volunteers back. Seasonals are next on the chopping block." I let out a long sigh. "Guess I should start packing then," I muttered. "Well, reckon you should," she replied offhandedly. It didn't take long for me to gather everything up. I sat on my pack, not sure what to even do at this point. "You really ought to head on home, Ash," Stephanie remarked as she pored over a map with a marker in hand. "That's what everyone keeps saying. They just want me to sit this one out." Frustration slithered into my voice as my fist balled. The ranger turned her head to gaze at me from over her shoulder. "It ain't 'cause we don't think you can stick it out here, girl." I grit my teeth a little as days of pent-up fury from these tragedies started to overflow into my throat. "I just want to fucking do something for once instead of just reacting to all this shit." Stephanie let out a sigh as she folded up the map and fully turned her attention to me. "That fire in you. I remember when I used to have it too, but then I realized this place doesn't give two shits about your intentions, your character, your family. It'll rip you apart without batting an eye and leave you in the dirt like trash for the crows." She ran a hand through her graying hair as she continued. "Do yourself a favor, hon. Go find yourself a nice comfy job or a man in California or New York, any one of them places. You'll live longer." I was left speechless, but I couldn't leave. Not yet. How could I just run away with my tail between my legs and pretend everything is normal again? Go back to the dorms with the same girls gossiping about the same guys, reading the same magazines. Stephanie muttered an apology between a sigh and turned to walk away, but I said something before she could. "I'm done running from this." I knew she heard me, but she didn't say anything. I walked away to my truck and sat in the padded seat after that with all my gear ready to go. I wondered where I would even go after this. Would they just stick me behind a desk at some visitor center or a booth at some campgrounds? And that's exactly what they did. Despite the bodies being found and the uniforms crawling everywhere, the campgrounds weren't empty. The trails stayed open. If anything, I found myself handing out more camping permits than usual. It's like all the commotion was attracting curious tourists. I even heard from one of the out-of-towners bragging about our park being on CNN. It was like some new theme park attraction to them. Tour buses full of tourists with SLRs hanging around their necks and camcorders strapped to their hands seemingly flooded the park in a matter of days. They seemed hell-bent on the fame of being the one to snap a photo of these man-eating animals, as they called them. Despite all my warnings I tried to give them, like staying on the trail and not wandering off, not going hiking at night, always bringing bear spray, locking up smellables, it didn't matter. It was useless. Their eyes glazed over as soon as my words left my mouth. Just as I was about to wonder if Steph and Jake were right, I overheard someone mentioning that the guy that was supposed to work in Tower 3 never showed because of the headlighting scaring everyone. I knew at that moment this could be my only chance to make things right. Jake raised an eyebrow at my request to man Tower 3, but he didn't ask many questions. He just sighed and penned me in without giving me too much fuss anymore. He muttered that I'd be starting next week before I left work for the day. Like the end of all my shifts as of late, I found myself driving to the only video store in town. It was the centerpiece of the one strip mall that Ravenwood could claim to hold. The windows of the store were plastered with posters of that newish Die Hard movie all the guys at work talked about during smoke breaks. I found myself wandering to blank tape section as the overhead lights buzzed above me. The scent of day-old popcorn and plastic filled my nostrils. My thumb trailed over the shelves crammed with brightly designed cases of empty tapes. I grabbed a few and tossed them in my basket. On the other side of the store, I could hear the chattering voices of a pair of kids as they excitedly flipped through those Nintendo Power magazines and squealed about new 3D games. I found myself cracking a smile at their excited voices as I stood in line at the register. As the cashier started to scan my tapes, he smiled at me and remarked how I must get lonely watching all those tapes by myself, how that could always change. I almost giggled like a schoolgirl at just how normal it seemed. After everything, just getting hit on by some guy at a store who was probably still a senior in high school felt so alien to me. Every part of me wanted to say yes, but I knew I couldn't. I gave him a nervous smile and apologized and told him I wouldn't be good company. He just sort of nodded and said maybe next time. I couldn't help but flinch when the TV behind him howled that scene from Jurassic Park where Muldoon gets his face ripped off by that raptor. His horrible screams all seemed familiar to me now, as he was ripped apart under the palm trees. I almost imagined hearing screams just like that at those campgrounds before Felix and I got there, whenever that elk was grabbing Jess's boyfriend and dragging him away as the scent of iron intertwined with burning firewood, and their screams were drowned out by Nirvana. Even as I walked outside, I couldn't stop it repeating in my head over and over. A voice that was familiar to me called out, "Ash?" I turned to see Felix standing next to his truck with a collection of shitty action movies cradled under his arm. "Oh, hey," I greeted, trying to keep my voice steady. "You're alright? You look a little pale," he remarked as he raised an eyebrow at my current state. "I'm fine. I'm just a little tired," I said, forming a disarming smile, which seemed to satisfy him well enough for now. "Can't blame you. Heard you're going for tower duty. You planning on staying there for the rest of the season till the shitstorm blows over?" I shrugged and adjusted my grip on the bag of tapes in my hand. "Something like that. Why do you ask?" He hummed a little and reached into his Carhartt and pulled out a blank envelope. "Here, it's for you." "Is that?" I started, but he cut me off. "Just take it," he insisted as he pushed the envelope into my plastic bag at my side despite my protests. "I don't understand." Felix let out what I would call a dad grumble and focused his gaze at me. "Look, I know I can't talk you out of going out there, but I still just want you to be safe." I couldn't meet his gaze as my silence was the only answer I could provide. "You're gonna need more than whatever revolver Jake has you parading around in out there." I finally let out a sigh and accepted defeat, muttered out an acknowledgement. Just make sure you zero the scope of any rifle you get, Annie Oakley. I let out a muffled groan. You're such an ass, I muttered. I know, I'm awful. If you need any help with getting a handle on one, let me know, alright? He said, with a grin forming on his scraggly face. Sure, thanks, Felix. This is... Don't mention it. Now I gotta run and return these tapes. Don't be stupid without me, alright? No promises, I said with a smirk, which earned me an eye roll from him as he brushed past me. He strode into the store, leaving me to my own devices once more. I clutched the plastic bag that held my only comforts for tonight tightly all the way to my car. To my surprise, the only sporting goods store was still open after dark. Everything about it looked unremarkable from the outside. It was just a wooden building with an arched roof with a half-lit sign above it that said Mike's Outdoor Supply Store. I finally grabbed the envelope from the bag and opened it up. Inside was a neat pile of hundreds that I didn't bother to count. Part of me didn't want to even look at this money, let alone think of using it. The envelope felt thicker than it should have in my hands. You really didn't have to do this for me. The fading sunlight cut a thin line against the horizon as I shuffled into the store. The door let out a bell-like chime as I stepped inside. The smell of gun oil, cheap chewing tobacco, and old furs washed over me as I took a few unsure steps forward. I pushed by shelves stuffed with fishing poles and camo jackets to the main counter. I smiled nervously at the store owner standing in front of a rack of rifles and shotguns. Handwritten toe tags swayed ever so slightly. The many stuffed heads of pronghorns and mule deer glared down at me with their dead eyes as I approached. The older man at the counter adjusted his surplus gun belt and smiled at me. I couldn't help but notice the occupied holster with a faded US pressed into the leather flap on it at his side, but I didn't say anything about it. Evening, miss. What can I get for you? I ran a hand through my long hair as I glanced over at the rack of rifles, not even sure where to begin or what to even get. Part of me wished I dragged Felix here with me. Looking for a big game rifle? I said, trying to sound like I knew what I wanted. What are you hunting? Elk? Moose? Well, about this Springfield here. He reached for a hefty rifle from the rack and locked the bolt to the rear before handing it to me. That there will put down anything with antlers this side of the Rockies. I found myself flinching from the rifle of wood and steel bearing its weight down on me. Wasn't really used to having anything heavier than a revolver on me. Right, what about for something bigger like a grizzly? I'm working in a fire tower for the season and I wanted some peace of mind. I asked as I clumsily handed the clerk the rifle back. My eyes wandering the back counter until the glare of the setting sun flickered against a framed photo of the man standing in a river posing with a kid that was probably young enough to be his grandson. He had a proud smile on his face as the two of them showed off a sizable bass they caught. Well, I got something a little heavier here. This Remington 700 BDL and 300 Win Mag. The excitable store owner handed me a scoped rifle of polished wood. I fussed with it for a second as I adjusted its sizable weight in my arms. Heavy, I mumbled, and the hunter let out a chuckle. Sure is. You don't want to be running a gun with that thing. You basically have to use it with sandbags or a bipod. Alright, I'll take it. Can I get 2 boxes of ammo for it? He nodded and placed 2 boxes of ammo on the counter in a flash. If you're going to use it on Grizzly, you're going to want these. Federal soft points. This will give you a wallop. I nodded and let out a muttered gratitude as he set down official-looking paperwork in front of me after I handed the rifle back to him. Out of state, right? Yeah. He nodded once and set out a few pens for me. That's fine. I just need your license, and I'll phone the sheriff. In the meantime, just need you to fill out this 4473 for me. I'll be back in a jiffy. It disappeared to the back of my license as I filled it out. Within a few minutes, he came back out and handed my ID back. Everything looks good. You want a Harris? Sling? It's on me. You don't have to. I let out a dejected huff as he insisted on putting on the bipod and sling for me, while he talked my ear off about his grandson's shooting his first gopher last week. The paperwork went by faster than I thought, and before I knew it, I was walking out the door. I bought a few more things with the envelope as I walked out with the rifle case. Even as I found myself back at that crummy cabin, I couldn't help but wonder if I was living on borrowed time. I set my things down and inserted the blank tape into the VCR and set it to record as my little cabin filled with the sound of melodramatic soap operas as the microwave buzzed as it spun a TV dinner around. I settled in the ugly couch that had been converted into a bed of sorts with sheets and proper pillows that I'd salvaged from my cot. I dug a fork into the processed Salisbury steak. I couldn't help but remember those weekday nights. Mom came home from the hospital in her scrubs with the scent of iodine and iron clinging to her, not even having the energy to do anything more than put some Swansons in the oven and call it dinner. Something about her weary eyes stopped me from complaining about how weird and watery the mashed potatoes tasted when I was younger. The memories of my childhood faded away as I lay down on the couch and tried my best to fall asleep. Every now and again, I would wake up in spurts and feed the VCR a new tape. The mediocre soap operas changing to infomercials and bogus psychic hotlines. I grumbled in annoyance as I switched sleeping positions and tried my best to go back to sleep. The days began to blur together of my desk job. It just felt like one big countdown till I switched over. What little time I spent off the job, I was with Felix at a property his buddy owned, zeroing that new rifle, blasting apart old Coke bottles and knocking down the metal outlines of deer. The rifle kicked like hell and was heavy as sin, but it packed a punch. That's all I really needed. The day before I was set to go out there, I spent the day packing my truck with gear I would need for what lay ahead. Felix insisted on helping me pack for the trip. I'm not sure why, but I appreciated it all the same. Just as I was closing up the truck, Felix's eyes drew to the worn canvas rifle case. So, that's for self-defense, right? He asked slowly. Yeah, we both know what's out there. Felix's brow furrowed and he inhaled once. I heard the flares, the boxes of ammo, the extra gas. That all for self-defense too? I remained silent as I fussed with the duffel bag's straps. He let out a tired exhale. No talking you out of this, is there? I have to do this, Felix. He shook his head and hissed through his teeth. Just be careful, all right? He finally relented, softening his voice a bit. I finally looked up at him and noticed moisture gathering up in the corner of his eyes. I stopped what I was doing, and without even thinking, I threw my arms around him. I'll be careful, I murmured into his shoulder. I don't know how long we stayed like that, but we said our final goodbyes and went our separate ways. I couldn't help but feel a dull ache in my chest for the rest of the day, like I was disappointing my dad all over again. I slipped 2 copies of that Polaroid into sealed envelopes. One addressed the detective from the other night, and the other to the state attorney's office. The walk to the P.O. box felt like miles, but it didn't matter. I left early the next day under the cover of dawn's darkness. The glare of my high beam steadily guided my way as I traversed the unpaved surface roads. The scraggly trees gave way to a small clearing. Silhouetted in the rising sun, Tower 3 stood, taller than all the evergreens. The chain link fence surrounding it, menacing with barbed wire, was the only thing that separated it from what lay within the forest. I took a moment to open the gate before I drove in. The feeling of being exposed only increased as I fiddled with the rusted padlocked road gate. For what felt like hours, I unloaded my truck and ferried my supplies up and down those creaky stairs. I wandered into one of the cheaply made outer buildings with a gas can in hand to feed the old red Honda generator. I flipped the choke on and the power switch. I yanked on the pull cord, letting out a few words that would make a church lady faint. After a few tries, the generator coughed and sputtered before finally roaring to life as the scent of burning fuel filled the air. I finally settled into the tower itself for the morning check-in. The solitary bulb hanging above me buzzed as I fiddled with the radio's knobs. I grabbed the receiver as I eyed one of the clipboards with a handwritten cheat sheet from one of the previous rangers. "Base, this is Tower 3. An older woman's voice crackled from the other end.
"Go ahead."
"I'm in service. Weather's clear. Temperature is 65 degrees. Low wind speed. Over."
"Good copy. Keep an eye out."
I fussed with the firefinder for hours as I did my rounds. My eyes could never stop drifting towards the tree line, like I would see it there, waiting for me. I looked over at the wall rifle rack, the same kind you would find in your grandpa's hunting cabin. Basically just a board with 2 pegs to keep the gun from falling off the wall. The rifle that I'd spent weeks training with rested there, just in case. I scanned above the trees with my heavy binos. I knew it was out there. I didn't know why or how, but for some reason I just did. I still had a job to do. In between bouts of paranoia, I wrote all the weather and temperature reports in the logbook that was as big as a phone book. I had a miserable breakfast of canned ravioli that I didn't feel like heating up, and a cup of Nescafe that tasted like tires and chalky dried creamer. Hours of mundane routine were filled with constant surveying. Even as I did another once-over of my binos, I noticed something odd among the trees. An almost skeletal tree, its branches blackened and barren from a lightning strike. Perched amongst the jagged limbs were the hunched forms of turkey vultures. Their distinctive crimson heads made the undead tree look like it was bleeding. The wake of vultures crowded every space as they unfurled their massive brown and black wings in the late afternoon sun. The lines of white on their underwings looked as if bones jutted out from the branches. The silent vigil's gaze was drawn to only one place. The aged spruce that stood beside them understood why in mere seconds. Scattered across the needles were the remains of a doe, too high up to be the work of a mountain lion. Its carcass was already meticulously pulled apart like a toddler of Play-Doh. The only way I could tell it used to be a deer was its cloven hooves dangling blissfully in the canopy. The wind blew just once over the trees, and with it, it carried the faint scent of ammonia. The carcass-ridden pine thrashed once from something below. The vultures sprang into flight as they glided through the warm gusts. I lowered the binoculars with a muted shudder, tearing my eyes away from this awful sight. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever did this was closer than I thought. I couldn't help but wonder if I was out of my depth. Should I have just taken Jake's offer, listened to Steph's advice? It was probably too late to turn back now. I still tried to act normally for the rest of the day, like if I just ignored it all, it might go away. Chop firewood for the night, make sure the generator wasn't running dry on fuel, filling up water jugs from the hand pump below, just anything to keep my mind busy. The shadows lengthened as the sun retreated behind the snow-capped mountains. I double-checked that the padlock held the gate shut, but I knew it probably wouldn't do much good to stop what's out there. I went back to the tower and tried to distract myself with filling out logs, but then my VHF crackled to life.
"Tower 3, this is Tower 4. How copy?"
I grumbled and fetched the receiver. "Tower 3 here. Go ahead."
"Yeah, I got eyes on some smoke near the ridge about bearing 130 and looks like about a mile from me. Can you confirm that over?"
"Yep, good copy. I'll take a look over." I grabbed the spotter from the corner of the room and carried it out to the balcony. I set up the tripod and looked through the scope after adjusting the focus. Sure enough, a wispy haze of grayish smoke silhouetted itself against the ridge. I slipped back inside to get a proper bearing from the Osborne. I adjusted the sights and stared through the crosshairs, jotting down a quick smoke report before keying back up. Tower 3 again. I got eyes on. It's about 115 degrees on my end. Same ridge. Looks like an illegal campsite off trail.
That's a good copy. I'll set up to the office and get a truck out there. Appreciate it. Tower 4 out.
Just like that, I was alone again. The night fell faster than I thought, despite the long summer days. I did my last check-in for the night and started to cook over the hissing Coleman. It was basically just a hamburger helper and some canned ground beef, but it was warm and took my mind off what I would do next. I kept my rifle loaded, ready to go at a moment's notice on the rack. I got the wood stove going when the chilled and nocturnal started to choke the tower. I curled up in the thin cot. The crackling fire and the howling wind stirring in the night held me for hours before sleep took me. When the rising sun finally drew me out of sleep, I spent the morning fiddling with the PA system that was left from the Carter days. With some effort, I managed to jerry-rig it to my Discman, but not for my own comfort. It would probably sound butchered and strangled, but it would do just fine. I took the rifle down from the rack and slung it over my shoulder, and fussed with the sling as it drooped a bit too far down my back. I ventured down the creaky stairs to my truck and dug out the cooler from the bed. The half-frozen ice sloshed around as I ungracefully hoisted it down. I dragged the wheeled cooler out of one of the side gates and prepared myself mentally before finally mustering up the strength to open the cooler. The rank stench of rotting fish guts and iron greeted me plainly as the half-frozen chum blocks swirled around. I did my best to not breathe in through my nose as I dumped the cooler out in a neat little line along the fence line. I was about to take the cooler back inside when I heard an uncharacteristically loud branch snapping from somewhere in the nearby brush. The footfalls of something large approached. I reached for my rifle over my shoulder. Another crash in the other bush neared close to me as I chambered around and brought the stock to my shoulder and started to back away towards the gate. A dark shape lumbered out of the shrubs. I quickly noticed its soft ears flopping and it moving in a dopey gait. I realized it was just a black bear. It curiously sniffed the air, its nose twitching as it sauntered over to the thawing chum block. It froze when it saw me standing there with the rifle and chuffed. I loaded my rifle and reached for the bear spray in my belt. I took my whistle from around my neck and blew 3 sharp bursts. It looked almost annoyed I was there as it chomped its jaws and waddled away. I let out a sigh and went back to the tower. I tried to act normal for the rest of the day. I acted like nothing was going to happen, but I knew it was a lie. When the sun began to dip below the horizon, I zipped up a hunting vest that was the smallest size I could find. It had everything I needed for tonight. It sagged around my shoulders, but it was enough for what I needed. I grabbed the rifle from the rack for the last time and stared out at those lines and lines of pines hanging in the darkness. I slipped on a pair of earplugs for my vest and grabbed the radio. With a heavy breath, I pushed down the emergency panic button on my VHF as my radio began to squawk with the office asking if I was okay. I didn't answer as I started to play the music on my Discman through the tower's PA. I flicked on the exterior lights before stepping out to the balcony. They provided just enough hazy light to see my target. The Nirvana tracks were almost choked through the dusty speakers. The riffs crackled in protest, but they never stopped. I was never into rock that much, but at this moment, with everything that happened here, all those times I could only watch while bodies were hauled out, and more missing person posters filled the visitor center, I understood it now. The raw power you felt listening to the guitar chugging, the drums pumping. Kurt Cobain's screams of rage tore across the pines, filling me with an awful fury I hadn't felt before. Despite how loud the music was, a familiar yet gut-wrenching mockery of the sounds of nature answered my challenge. A whiff of bleach in the wind told me all I needed to know. I tied a bandana across my face. I couldn't lose my focus. Not now. I cycled the action once and unfolded the bipod, letting it rest on the guardrail. I waited, just for a moment. I saw it, standing just ahead of the tree line. The chimera was there. Its many heads glared up at me. I reached into my vest and pulled out a flare pistol. I raised it into the air and fired it. It wasn't as bright as Stephanie's flare, but the other towers would see it. The red glow from the flare painted its silhouette plainly to me as I brought my cheek to the stock. I set the focus and lined up a shot. Much to my annoyance, it didn't stay still. My finger curled around the trigger. Its massive form started to try to barrel itself over the fence, but it only ended up getting itself caught on the barbed wire. It howled with fury as its heads tried to pluck out the wires. It slowed it just enough to get my first shot off. The rifle's roar traveled up my entire body and settled in my chest with each round I fired. I squeezed the trigger as I was trying to pull the fence down with its sickly limb. I was glad the vest had padded shoulders as the rifle bucked me hard with its recoil. A shriek of pain that was quickly drowned out by grunge filled the night. Dust and rocks were kicked up, but I was sure I hit it. It jerked and thrashed as it seemed more feverishly to rip the wire out of its body. The chain link began to sag and buckle from the weight of that unnatural thing as it kept pushing through. The barbed wire wrapped itself around some of its limbs as fence posts started to get pulled out of the cracked concrete. I racked the bolt and chambered the next round, trying to maintain a count of how many I'd left in the rifle. Just as it was about to free itself from the fence, I squeezed off a second round. It stumbled again and let out another shriek, but it didn't stop. I hissed in irritation and injected the smoking brass. Just how many fucking rounds is this thing gonna take? It limped towards the tower faster than I thought. I adjusted my angle, but I rushed it too much and the next shot just barely missed it. Shit, I muttered as I noticed the rifle empty on rounds. I felt my stomach drop as the faded wooden tower shuddered from something grabbing a hold. With trembling hands, I tried to feed a new round from the sling, but it slipped between my shaking fingers. I hissed out a curse as I looked over the edge for where it might be now, but I couldn't see it anywhere. The music quieted down, just for a moment, to feel my own heart pounding in my chest. My eyes widened when I heard a single beam creak from the weight of something new. A shape lunged for me in the corner of my eye. I unclipped my holster as I turned around as fast as I could. A bear's head with its misshapen maw lunged for my neck, but I moved just enough for it to grab my shoulder instead. Its teeth tore into my shoulder. I didn't even register that I was screaming at first, but I was. All I remember was the cold sensation of my hand tightly gripping around the .38. Without even thinking, I pressed into the side of its head and pulled the trigger. I expected to hear a loud bang, but I only heard a fleshy thump as bone fragments and gray matter finally ejected out of the exit wound, and the head went completely slack-jawed instantly. A light mist of blood covered my shooting hand. I tore myself away from the chimera as it sagged, just barely holding itself from completely falling from the roof. I backed away until I slammed into the railing and panic-fired the other 5 in the cylinder, but it didn't seem to be as effective. I kept pressure on my bleeding shoulder as I rushed down the stairs away from it. I stopped halfway and slid open the revolver. I tipped the sidearm over and punched the ejector rod, dumping the smoking casings. I was huffing and puffing while I fought with the snap on the stiff leather speedloader pouch. My slick hand slipped a few times before I was able to finally yank out the speedloader. The cylinder slipped on me twice as I frantically tried to jam in the speed loader. By the third try, I managed to line it up, twisted the knob, slid in a fresh 6, and slammed the revolver closed. I stopped again when I heard the sound of something metallic dragging against wood. I reached into the vest's game pocket and pulled out a marine flare. I yanked off the cap and struck the flare head against the striker like a match. After a few tries, the flare hissed to life as my vision was filled with a blinding red. The crimson-gray smoke obscured my vision just a bit, but not enough to see the shape of that spider-like being hanging from the tower as a wolf's head lunged for my throat for the killing blow. This time, I was faster. I ducked like I was playing dodgeball again, and before it had a chance to position itself to strike again, I slammed the burning stick of magnesium into its eye socket. The repulsive stench of burning fur overpowered me quickly, even with the bandana over my face. It screamed bloody murder as it thrashed and seized from the unbearable agony. Somehow, it still held on to the tower despite it all. But it still gave me just enough time to run down to my truck. The dull burning sensation of my wound started to weigh on me as the adrenaline started to wear off. My shoulder was already soaked as I felt warm liquid travel down my arm. I reached the tower's base and limped to my truck. I yanked out the heavy tin of the first aid kit from the bed and threw myself into the driver's seat. The red glow of the marine flare fell freely as it landed unceremoniously, covered in charred skin and singed hairs. I frantically dug into the kit, yanking out the 5 different kinds of band-aids and aspirin until I managed to find something more substantial. I ripped open the clinical packaging, the white already becoming stained with my blood. I shoved a combine pad onto my shoulder and ripped a few strips of duct tape with my teeth and slapped it on. It wasn't pretty, but it was enough for now to stop the bleeding. My head dipped for a second as a wave of dizziness washed over me. I fought my own body to stay awake just for a little longer. I started a Chevy's engine as it rumbled to life. The Chimera slunk down like a snake from the faded wooden foundations. It moved slower now, unevenly. Parts of its fur were matted with its own blood. The mockery of the hound's head had my mark on it. Half its face was almost burned away entirely. Its bones were blackened and charred. The skin barely clung on. Its crowded, uneven teeth now exposed to me. It dragged behind some of its larger, crooked limbs, now encased in the barbed wire's teeth. I couldn't help but smile almost gleefully. My slick, trembling hands gripped the steering wheel. A single thought crossed my primal brain that filled me with an intoxicating high of newfound power. I put on my seatbelt and slammed my foot down on the gas. The tires welled in protest before my truck barreled forward. I shifted up a gear as my speed soared. I didn't have time to react before I crashed into it. I felt the impact shake the entire cabin. The seatbelt painfully dug into my chest as it locked my torso in place. My head slammed forward into the steering wheel. I was honestly surprised the impact didn't knock me unconscious. A sharp pain shooting to my lower back seemed to be enough to keep me awake. A misshapen hoof wildly kicked through my windshield. Slivers of laminated glass fell into my lap as the creature's hoof twitched to get a better angle on me. My vision narrowed as I reached for my holster. I could barely see its shape out of the spiderwebbed glass, but it didn't stop me from accelerating. It let out a furious shriek as my Smith & Wesson left its holster. With shaking hand, I slapped the trigger again and again, each round putting a new hole into my windshield as tiny shards of glass peppered my face. My gaze settled on the form of a boulder bigger than a bison. I grinned as I plowed towards, with the Chimera still clinging to my hood. The truck thrashed when I made contact, pitting the chimera between the boulder and my truck. It felt like a sledgehammer punching into my ribs when the airbags finally deployed, knocking the wind out of me. The hood of my truck hissed and smoked with a sizable dent torn through the grille. My wound jostled as I let out a cry. Blood ran down my brow as I gasped for breath. That thing from the woods seemed to still be alive. It desperately tried to claw its way out, but it was useless. The tires squealed and smoked as I kept pumping the gas to keep it trapped. I ripped off the seatbelt and practically fell out of the truck onto my knees. I panted heavily as I lumbered to my vehicle, holding onto the sides for support until I grabbed a big jerry can and limped my way back to the front of the car. The chimera was panicking now, as its cloudy eyes locked on to what I held. It yelped almost pathetically like a kicked dog as it tried to somehow wiggle its way out. I splashed it several times with the gasoline until it was sufficiently soaked in fuel. I dropped the can and reached into my vest and pulled out the flare pistol. I fished out the empty shell and thumbed in a new one. Before I could take aim, a sudden, unbearable jolt of pain shot up my back. My legs buckled seemingly out of nowhere and gave up on supporting my weight entirely. I tumbled to the ground with a scream. I tried to get back up, but my legs wouldn't move. Tears quickly formed in the corner of my eyes. It couldn't be true. The chimera stopped struggling and watched me silently, like it was quietly gloating in my suffering. In the mess of heads it stole, one settled its beady eyes on me. The head of a raven. It croaked out only 2 words in an awful scratchy voice that didn't belong to a human. Won't matter. Tears of rage now flowed freely as it mixed with the bleeding. I grit my teeth so hard it felt like they would crack. I raised the flare pistol and thumbed the hammer back. Burn! I spat through gritted teeth. I almost swore I saw terror in its milky eyes before I pulled the trigger, but it didn't matter. The flare barely even popped before the gasoline ignited. An effigy of what was once the chimera burned like a comet. It thrashed, it screamed, it begged, or at least I think it did. The heat washed over the side of my face as I crawled away from the burning inferno. The stench of gas, death, and charred hair hung heavily in the night. Just over the ridge, the sound of approaching rotors drew near. I almost laughed, but the deep pain in my chest cut it short. The dark form of a helicopter flew low over me as its spotlight settled on me. I squinted and lowered my gaze from the bright light. The bird swung around and landed swiftly as smoke and dust and pebbles flowed in the air from its wash. Through the wall of haze and dust, the tall forms of 2 uniformed men emerged from the darkness. State troopers wearing heavy black vests bulged with stitched-on pouches and large lettering that read State Police. Familiar-shaped helmets silhouetted them like Marines on TV standing in front of burning oil fields. Clear, thick goggles shielded them from the chopper's wash. They shouldered sleek black rifles that looked like they came out of Apocalypse Now. Long, cumbersome maglights were taped onto the handguards, casting thin beams of amber light through the smoke. The glow of their maglights fell on what lay behind me. I turned to see the flames smoldering now, the gasoline already burned away. Despite it all, it was still twitching and showing signs of clinging to life. "Shit! I got one! Still moving!" One of them shouted over the spinning blades. "Put him down!" The other barked, raising the rifle to his shoulder. The state troopers went to one knee and fired off a series of shots. The air vibrated as the crack of rounds easily made their mark. Their muzzle flashes painted the night. The chimera finally stopped moving altogether as its heads rolled back in place. Wisps of smoke and dust curled around his bleeding form. One trooper edged closer and put 2 more rounds into the abomination's limp form. The 2 lawmen turned to me. One of them reached for his shoulder mic, the other kneeled beside me and held pressure on my shoulder. I grit my teeth as pain jolted in my entire body. "Can you stand?" he asked me. "I can't feel my legs," I practically whimpered as tears now flowed freely down my face. Adam 6-3, shots fired. Scene's clear now. We found her, but she's in rough shape. I need that RA on me now. Despite how loud the rotors were, I could still hear his radio crackle as he swung a glowing chem light tied to 550 cord over his head like a spinning buzzsaw.
10-4, hang tight, RA's moving to you.
I could only stare up at the sky, feel the vibrations of the rotary wing settle in my entire body. My ears rang like church bells, the sound of my own shallow breathing, drowning out everything else. The edges of my vision swam with black dots. 2 men in dark blue flight suits suddenly stood over me with strange dome-shaped helmets. Oversized radio mics partially hid their lips from me. They both wore strange harnesses that were a mess of pouches, buckles, and straps. Their mouths moved, but I couldn't hear them anymore as they shined penlights in my face. I struggled to keep my eyes open. The medic strapped something tight around my neck, but I was too dizzy to see what it was. My entire body was quickly cinched down by unseen hands. The sensation of being lifted into the air shortly followed. I turned my head one last time to gaze at the tower, still standing amongst the smoke. The PA speakers looped over and over of the voice of Nirvana, furiously screaming out 2 words: "Entertain us." Like it was some twisted call to action, but in that moment, it didn't feel like the end. It felt like the first tragedy we bothered to even notice. There wouldn't be another summer for us to enjoy.